they separated. They came up in two groups. And when they started to do that, I got real scared. So then they rolled me over on my back, and the examiner had a long needle. It's bigger than any needle I've ever seen. And he said he just wants to put it in my navel. And I tell him, no, it won't hurt. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I try to maintain control so Betty cannot tell I am scared. God, I'm scared. It's all right. You can go right on, experience it. It will not hurt you now. I got to get my gun. Oh! I got my gun! All right. All right. That's all right. What is it, Steve? Let's get now. Oh, no. It's forgotten.
You are listening to Perplexity.
In the 1960s, a married couple from New Hampshire would share their unbelievably close encounter with the third kind. Their story would make headlines from coast to coast. They would go on to be studied by thousands of experts. And today, this encounter is still considered one of the most compelling accounts that proves there's more life out there. Today, we will be exploring the story of the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kadra. If you're new to the show, hello and welcome. I tell tales every single week that have perplexed me. So if you love a good mystery that leaves you wanting more, don't worry, you're in the right place. And if you end up enjoying today's episode, I would love if you continue to follow along. If you're a returning listener, hi, my friends, welcome back. So happy you're here. We have a huge story today, and if you recognized the audio at the beginning, you are probably a big fan of this case. If you're not sure what that was, we will be getting into that, but just a little sneak preview, that is audio from the Hypnosis tapes of the Hill family. They have a wild story to tell, and those Hypnosis tapes are terrifying, they're intense. I also read 2 books for this episode, so those will be linked down in the show notes. I do want to issue a trigger warning. Regardless of your beliefs in alien life or lack thereof, this is a pretty intense episode, so this might not be for you. Listener discretion is advised, and all the sources I used for today's episode will be down in the show notes. So, without further ado, let's get into this huge story. I'm so excited. The story of Betty and Barney Hill's UFO abduction. Betty and Barney Hill lived together in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They were successful, they were an active couple, they were very intelligent and well-liked by the community. Betty had a master's degree, and Barney had wanted at one time to be an engineer, but he was a black man and was told at the time that he couldn't get that kind of job because there was a lot of racism during this time period. And so he ended up working for the United States Postal Service, and Betty was a successful social worker. Barney and Betty were an interracial couple, and this is actually very important for this story. They were married at a time when interracial couples were exceptionally rare in the United States. It was actually still illegal in several states, and there are some theories later that actually play into this interracial component. So that's why I bring this up. And by all accounts, Betty and Barney were normal, sane, happy people. They were reliable, had no history of mental health issues. Barney, age 41 at the time of this event, had an IQ of 140. He was the chairman of the Portsmouth NAACP. He was a member of the State Advisory Board of the United States Civil Rights Commission and the Board of Directors of the Rockingham County Poverty Program. Betty was age 39 and a social worker, an assistant secretary, and a community coordinator for the NAACP, and a United Nations envoy. So again, I bring all this up to just show you these aren't your run-of-the-mill people. Not that that makes those stories less credible, but like these people had a lot to lose by making up a story like this. So that's part of why I find this story so interesting and believable. So on September 19th, 1961, at around 10:30 p.m., the Hills' lives would forever change. While driving back to Portsmouth from their vacation in Niagara Falls and Montreal, they would encounter something unbelievable. So they were just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, near Lincoln. And what's also interesting about this whole thing is like why the Hills were even out there in the first place. This was not a planned vacation. Barney and Betty would both later say it was very spur of the moment, almost as if it was fate. This was also out of character for them. It was like something was calling them out on this vacation. It was so last minute that they had no more than $75 cash between the two of them. This was, however, a drive that they had made before, and Barney estimated that they would be home by 2:30 or 3 in the morning at the latest. So it's going to be a really long night, and in the car with them was their dachshund dog, Delcy. As Barney drove along a secluded area on Route 3 through the White Mountains, Betty noticed something in the distance. Up in the sky was a bright light, but there was something unusual about it. It was hovering just under the moon. Then suddenly, this bright light darted in front of the west side of the moon. At first, Betty thought it must be a falling star, but it continued to move erratically, and soon she had no idea what she was looking at, to the point that it was frightening her. Then the light became larger and brighter. So she urged Barney to take a look at this thing, and Barney did notice the light, but he was trying to think logically. He didn't think much of it. He thought it was probably a satellite, but Betty was insistent that they should pull over to the side of the road and get a closer look at this thing. So Barney's like, okay, fine, whatever. I want to stretch my legs anyway. Let's take Delcy out for a little walk really quick. So they pull over to this deserted picnic area, and this is just south of Twin Mountain. When they were in this area, Barney kind of realized it was dark. There could be a lot of bears in the area. He wasn't sure if it was the best idea to take Delcy around, so he's kind of walking her cautiously, and he even took his handgun with him for protection, just in case. Meanwhile, Betty is perplexed and looking at this bright light in the sky, trying to figure out what it is, and she happens to have some binoculars with her, so she pulls those out, and she's looking at the light through her binoculars, and she realized this was not just a light. It appeared to be a spaceship. She could make out the outline of a large ship, and she noticed that it was emitting a number of multicolored lights. So then Betty thought back to 4 years ago, when her sister had a UFO encounter. She had found her sister's story believable, and she had become a bit of a UFO enthusiast herself, but she had never had her own experience. Soon, this spaceship grew larger and darted low to the ground. Barney was still skeptical about all of this, but as he walked to Delcy, he realized this object was completely silent, and he started to get this foreboding feeling, like something was watching him. Whatever this thing was, it seemed like it was only getting closer. So soon, Barney too became frightened, though he didn't tell Betty. Eventually, Barney and Betty decide there's nothing we can do about this. So it's super late. Let's get back on the road. Let's just keep driving. So they put Delcy in the back seat, and Barney cautiously began to drive to Franconia Notch, which is a narrow mountain pass along the road. Delcy, who was typically a very mellow little dog, was whining and appeared anxious. As the couple drove, they continued to watch this odd object, which was now flying above a signal tower on top of Cannon Mountain, about 1 mile south of Indian Head. At this point, it was hovering about 100 feet above their car, so it was certainly getting closer. Betty estimated the object was about 60 feet long and round in shape. It was massive. In fact, the craft covered their entire view of the windshield. It reminded Barney of a giant rotating pancake, cigar-shaped. Barney noticed not only was this object silent, but it also had no propellers. So Barney has had enough of this. He's like, what the hell is this thing? So he decides he's going to take a look through these binoculars. And what he saw next would horrify him. Barney would later describe seeing between 8 to 11 humanoid figures with glossy black uniforms and caps. One of them, who seems to be the leader, then began to silently, telepathically communicate with the Hills. The creature who seemed to be the leader said that he wanted Betty and Barney to stay. He asked them not to leave. But it was at this exact moment that a shock went through Barney, and he knew something was very wrong for a reason that he could never explain. He knew that they were about to be captured. It's like something in his gut was telling him, we gotta go. So he grabs his handgun, he aims it at the craft and prepares to fire. But then he felt like he was instructed not to. And he would later recall the eyes of one of the creatures staring down at him. Barney said he had never seen eyes like that. He would later say that these eyes would forever haunt him. They were permanently in his brain. So he still has the binoculars that he's looking through. And at this point, he doesn't want to look at these creatures anymore. They're frightening him so much. But he said it felt like he had to use all of his energy to rip these binoculars from his eyes. It was like something was holding them there. So Barney's screaming. He finally loses it, and he's like, we gotta go right now. So in total hysteria, Barney puts the car in drive, pedal to the metal. He told Betty to keep an eye on the craft, letting him know where it was because he was gonna try to lose it. But it was no use. Wherever they went, this spacecraft kept up with them, no problem. So then Betty rolls her window down to get a better look, but she saw nothing. They couldn't see this craft anymore. No matter where they looked, there was nothing. But then they heard a sound, a sort of rhythmic beeping and buzzing. And this sound made the Hills feel like they were being targeted. It was like the sound was pointed right at their vehicle. Then the next thing they knew, Betty and Barney felt very tired and very confused. It was like all of their senses had become muted. This today is referred as the Oz effect by UFO researchers. In many UFO abduction stories, the victim's senses become dull and they're not able to perceive any outside sounds. They enter this state of like being unnaturally calm. It's almost as if their brains are being controlled by something or someone else. Then the Hills' car began to vibrate, and their bodies started to tingle from head to toe. They heard another series of beeps and buzzes. They were now fully conscious again. They were relieved. It was over. So they're looking around. They realize, okay, we're still in our car. We're on the road. Delsey's in the back of the car. We're intact. Everything's fine. And everything around them also just seemed totally normal. But where were they? They didn't recognize any of their surroundings. After looking at the signs and the landscapes for a couple minutes, the Hills realized they were not where they last remembered. They were now somehow 35 miles south from their last known location. This was obviously very disturbing, but again, it's super late. They're exhausted. They just had this horrifying encounter. What else are they supposed to do? So the Hills figured out where they were and returned home, driving for hours mostly in silence. Just outside of Portsmouth, dawn began to streak the sky in the east. The birds were chattering, but this still didn't make any sense. According to Barney's calculations, they should have been home no later than 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was dusk. So at this point, Barney looks at his watch, but he still doesn't know what time it is because his watch has stopped working. When they got inside the house, they read the clock and it was 5 a.m. Why had it taken 2 hours longer to drive back from Niagara Falls? Where had this 2 hours of time gone? Then the Hills began to have some strange and unexplained impulses. For example, Betty was now overcome with anxiety. She felt compelled to keep her luggage by the back door instead of putting it away. She feared that it had been contaminated with radiation. Barney also said for some inexplicable reason, he felt very unclean. He felt like they both needed to shower. He also felt the unexplained need to examine his genitals, but he saw nothing out of the ordinary. He did notice, though, his lower body hurt all over. So they're unpacking some of their belongings, and they also noticed that the leather strap on their binoculars was now broken, and not only was it broken, it was cleanly severed. They couldn't recall how that had happened. The two were just silent for a while before they sat down together, took a breath, and they're trying to recollect themselves and figure out what the hell just happened. They're comparing stories, seeing what each other remembers, and they realized that the last thing both of them remembered was that second strange buzzing and beeping sound. This was horrifying and so strange, but again, what were they supposed to do? Barney also felt a presence. Not that this presence was there with them, but it was like lingering in his subconscious in some way. And he knew that something very important had just happened. So eventually, the Hills go to bed, and again, they got back at dusk, so they go to bed during the day. They knew that if they stood any chance of figuring out what had happened, they couldn't really do much on little sleep. So they sleep for a lot of the day. They wake up at nearly 3 o'clock that afternoon, and Barney felt a vague and indefinable presence still lingering with him. Betty's looking through her belongings, and she realizes that her dress that she had been wearing that night was torn in multiple places. There was also a fine pink powder on her clothing. Her earrings were missing. The top of Barney's dress shoes that he had been wearing were also very scratched up. Notice I said the top of the shoes, not the bottom, which would indicate Barney had been dragged. At this time, Betty was certain that they had encountered aliens. But Barney refused to acknowledge this. He was in a different place with how he was processing this. Then he had an idea. They should go to separate areas, draw pictures of what they remembered seeing, then come back and compare their drawings. So he tells Betty what he wants to do. She agrees. And after doing this for several minutes, they came back, laid their drawings side by side, and they were nearly identical. After Betty spoke with her sister about the incident, the one that had also had a UFO encounter, Betty felt some relief. She wasn't crazy. Her sister believed her. Eventually, they started talking about radiation exposure, and Betty's sister suggested that she go out to their car with a compass and put the compass all over the car to see if anything would happen with the compass. So Betty's like, okay. So she's digging around in the house trying to find a compass, and Barney's like getting mad, and he's like, will you just stop this whole thing? I don't want to think about this. I don't want to talk about it. What are you doing? And she's like, I have to know. I need this compass. So he's like super pissed. She grabs the compass, runs outside, and she's running it all over the car. It's raining. She's soaking wet, but she's desperate to figure this out. At first, with this compass, nothing happened. But as she got to the back of the car, to the trunk, she found a dozen or more shiny circles scattered on the surface of the trunk. These were perfect circles, about the size of a silver dollar. And when she ran the compass over the top of them, to her amazement, the compass spun erratically. Betty showed this to Barney. She runs inside. Oh my God, you have to see this. Come outside. And Barney's like, again, are you kidding me? I don't want to think about this. I just want to bury this deep in my subconscious, never talk about it again. And he continued to try to rationalize. He was like, the compass must be broken. So this brought a lot of tension with the couple. They were arguing a lot. They were handling this very differently. After another day had gone by, the Hills had no answers to the questions that plagued them. So they decided to get help. They contacted the Peace Air National Guard base in New Hampshire, and this was at the time that UFO reports were still being taken very seriously by the government. They had already gone through the Roswell incident at this point, and Project Blue Book, which we talked about on the show quite a while back, Project Blue Book was still going on through 1969. So the very next day, September 22nd, Betty and Barney Hill got a call. Major Paul W. Henderson was coming to interview them. So Henderson interviewed the couple. He finalized his report 4 days later. During this time, they were interviewed in separate rooms, and they were each instructed to roughly sketch out the craft, which when compared were again remarkably similar. Henderson said at first that he found this believable. He believed the Hills, but then he said that they had misidentified the spaceship as planet Jupiter. Right, because that totally happens all the time. Jupiter chases and abducts people. But whatever. Henderson later changed his findings, stating that there was insufficient data to then draw any conclusion. So this encounter was still unexplained, and the way that Henderson went about all of this, I found to be very confusing. It's like he just couldn't, he found it perplexing. He didn't know what to think of it. So he just kept changing what he thought it was. However, when the Hills spoke with Henderson, they hadn't told him everything. They felt they had to leave some details out because this was the 60s. This was a time that people were committed to institutions against their will for much smaller claims. They wanted to appear sane, and they had, a lot going for them. But Betty still had this feeling like she couldn't rest, she couldn't live like this, she had to have answers some way. So the next thing that Betty did is she went to her local library and she started reading up on UFOs. She first checked out a book by Major Donald E. Kehoe, a retired Marine Corps major. Kehoe was the head of the NICAP, or NICAP, and this is the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, a dedicated UFO research group. So she reads his whole book cover to cover. I imagine her just sitting in the library reading it for hours. And then she wrote a letter to Kehoe telling him everything that she could remember about that fateful night, including a physical description of the aliens, which we will talk more about later. So Kehoe gets this letter, and his ears immediately perked up, and he quickly passed Betty's letter over to Walter N. Webb, a NICAP member and a Boston-based astronomer. So on October 21st, 1961, Webb would sit down with Betty and Barney Hill. Webb also found Barney and Betty's story and their behavior so compelling that he believed them. Webb would later say, quote, "I was so amazed, impressed by both the Hills and their account. We skipped lunch and we went right through the afternoon and early evening. During that time, I cross-examined them together, separately, together, re-questioned them again and again. I tried to make them slip up somewhere, and I couldn't. I simply couldn't. Theirs was an ironclad story." End quote. Webb also felt like the gaps in their memory, because they couldn't remember everything that had happened, were not to him indicative of lying or a misunderstanding, but rather a normal human reaction like suppressed memories due to a trauma. Betty and Barney also told Webb how much this encounter was just plaguing them. They were desperate. They wanted to remember what happened. They couldn't get closure if they didn't know. What if they underwent hypnosis? So Webb agreed this wasn't a bad idea, but Webb himself didn't have any expertise in this. He would need the help of someone else. While they were waiting to find someone who could help them with this, the Hills tried to continue on with their lives as best as they could, while Webb typed up a 6-page report. But the Hills were continuously haunted day and night, and Betty was experiencing, for the first time ever in her life, incredibly vivid dreams. They felt so real, So she started writing down the details from these dreams, hoping to make sense of them. Hi, everybody. We're going to take a quick break from the show so that I can let you know about the special that I am running for a limited time only at the Perplexed Society. If you use the code SUMMER50, you are going to get 50% off your first month on Patreon. That means you get Perplexity episodes 2 days early, you get them ad-free, and that's just for $1 because the tier is normally $2 a month. If you want to unlock tons and tons of bonus content as well, over 70 pieces of bonus content, as a matter of fact. If you want merch, stickers, a handwritten letter, you can check out my other tiers. All of the tiers start as little as $2 a month, but again, you're going to get half off in the first month. If you want bonus content, that starts at $5 a month, which means it's just going to be $2.50. The Patreon is the number one reason I get to keep doing this podcast. And we have an awesome community over there. There's tons of perks to joining. Like, for example, your topic requests and your listener stories get prioritized. So don't wait. I promise you're going to love it. Go check out patreon.com/perplexity mystery podcast right now and use the code SUMMER50 for 50% off your first month on Patreon. This offer is again for a limited time, and that is patreon.com/perplexity mystery podcast. Use the code SUMMER50 and I will see you there. Now back to the show. Betty dreamed of their car being surrounded by strange, inhuman men, and she was fighting to stay awake but unable to. Then her and Barney were being led through a forest by these beings. She called out to Barney, but he didn't respond. It was as if he was in a trance. These creatures were short, between just 4 to 5 feet tall, in blue uniforms with black caps and gray skin. They had dark hair, bluish lips, prominent noses, and large, dark eyes. The creatures were almost human-like, but not quite. They were also incredibly rigid. They moved like soldiers. Betty and Barney were then led up a ramp into the round metal craft. Then the creatures separated the couple. Betty was led into a room with 2 of these creatures, the leader and another entity that they called the Examiner. The Examiner explained they would need to undergo a series of tests. Then they could go home. These tests were designed to determine the differences between humans and their kind. At times, the aliens would communicate with Betty telepathically or via thought transference, per Barney's words. Other times, they communicated verbally, speaking in what is described by Betty and Barney as some type of accent, though they never moved their mouths. The Examiner then cut off a lock of Betty's hair and took trimmings from under her fingernails. He meticulously studied her feet, legs, hands, throat, mouth, teeth, ears, and eyes. Then he picked up a dull knife. He scraped some loose skin cells from Betty's arm and put them onto what Betty described as plastic wrap. Then he pulled out a long needle. Betty lay there frozen in fear. The Examiner explained it was now time to test Betty's nervous system. She was so terrified. He then inserted the needle into her belly button, and a flash of pain went over Betty. But then the Examiner quickly waved his hand over her, and the pain vanished. Here's a recording of her later discussing these same events with a hypnotherapist, which at this point now seems to be memories of that night.
He stopped the car, and these men started to come up to the car. They separated. They came up in 2 groups. And when they started to do that, I got real scared. The car motor died, the car stalled, and when they started coming up, Barney tried to start the car. He tried to start it, and you know how a motor of a car would just turn over, a little fire? And he started to start the car. I start the car, it won't start. And then the car goes, and I think, well, clicking, and I just put my hand on the car door and open it. And they come up and they open it for me. They open the car door, very big bit. And it's 1, 2, 3. And one man puts his hand down. I don't know what happened. So then they roll me over on my back, and the examiner has a long needle in his hand, and I see the needle, and it's bigger than any needle I've ever seen. And I asked him what he's going to do with it, and he said, just a simple test, it won't hurt me. And I asked him what, and he said he just wants to put it in my navel. And I tell him, no, it won't hurt, don't do it, don't do it. And he said, no, it won't hurt. And he sticks a nail into my navel instead. And I'm crying, and I tell him it's hurting, take it out. And then the leader, he goes over and he puts his hand, runs his hand in front of my eyes. And he says, I'll be all right. I won't feel it. And all the pain goes away.
After the needle work with the examiner, the testing was now complete. Betty spoke with the leader of the ship and was told that she could keep a book filled with strange markings. The leader gave her this book and she accepted it, and she soon reunited with her husband. The couple was then led back to the car, but before the couple drove away, these beings started arguing with each other. They weren't all in agreement about Betty keeping this mysterious book. So eventually, of course, the leader took the book back. We never get to see the book, okay? This is like when I found out the snake book was missing from the Dawdleston messages. I want to see these books. The leader said that they had decided as a group the pair was no longer allowed to remember this encounter. After returning to their car, they were instructed to wait to drive away until the craft had left. Betty tirelessly wrote this dream down, page after page. Could this have been a memory? These dreams would continue for 5 straight nights. But then, just as mysteriously as they started, the dreams stopped and they never happened again. As for Barney, he was dealing with severe, crippling anxiety, and this was something he had never dealt with before. He was living in constant worry and fear. What if these beings came back? He had to take 3 months leave from work. He also started drinking again, and an ulcer that he had been dealing with had become worse. So this just really shows how the paranormal can affect people. These were successful, intelligent people that were happy, you know? So I really think at the very least, something life-changing happens to them that night. The question is what? On November 21st, 1961, the Hills were once again interviewed by NICAP. This time they spoke with members C.D. Jackson and Robert E. Homan. They told Jackson and Homan about how their 4-hour drive had turned into 7 hours. And this is when they learned that missing time was common in abduction cases. Every weekend, the Hills also started taking trips out to the area where they were abducted, hoping that this would jog more memories or that they would find some type of clue. They did this for years, but they never found anything. November 1962, the pastor of the Hills local church happened to invite a man named Captain Ben W. Sweat of the U.S. Air Force. He was invited to speak, and Sweat read all these excerpts from his new poetry book, but he also discussed his personal fascination with hypnosis. And remember, the Hills really wanted to try hypnosis to see if these were like suppressed memories and they could finally get closure and understanding about what had happened. So maybe meeting Sweat was fate. What if he could help the Hills finally remember what had happened that night? So after he spoke, Barney and Betty went up and talked to Sweat, and he found the Hills' story very fascinating, but he also explained he was by no means a professional in this area. He would feel safer for them to work with a professional hypnotist. And around this time, Barney also started to develop a geometrically perfectly circular ring of warts in the area of his groin, which, to kind of call back to when they first got home, this was right around the area where he had felt urged to check himself the night of the encounter. Remember, we said he was urged to look at his groin for some reason and didn't find anything. So maybe this was related in some way. Eventually, Barney also started working with a therapist named Dr. Stevens, and then he got a referral from Stevens to a hypnotist named Benjamin Simon. So these infamous hypnosis tapes come from Dr. Benjamin Simon's work with Betty and Barney Hill. Simon lived in Boston. He was also a major skeptic, which I always like to highlight. But when Simon met with Barney, he came to believe his account was genuine. So finally, January 4th, 1964, years after this event, the hypnosis sessions would begin. They would continue for 5 months. Simon would perform hypnosis on both Betty and Barney, but he always completed their sessions separately, which I think is another really important thing to highlight. After each session, he would also induce amnesia to make them forget what had been discussed. This was done controversially, according to Simon, for 2 reasons. 1, to ensure that the Hills could not influence each other's accounts, and 2, to protect them from trauma, which I could understand. Simon wanted to be confident in these recollections before helping them actually consciously remember them, because if he was wrong, this would only cause the Hills further distress, right? Under hypnosis, Barney would share with Simon that the leather strap on their binoculars that had been cleanly severed happened while he was running back to his car, trying to get away from the spacecraft. He then said when he drove away, he started to feel this compelling feeling to stop and pull over, so he did that. There's a lot more detail about this in the books that I read as well, so again, I want to highlight those books are down in the show notes. I highly recommend them. One of them is very dense. It's like over 400 pages, but it is very interesting. So when Barney pulls over, he sees 6 humanoid creatures approaching him. They then instructed him not to be afraid and to just remain calm. The leader of the 6 then told Barney to close his eyes. He did this, and he felt like the leader's eyes were pushing into his eyes. Barney explained he had never seen eyes like that, large and dark and slanted. They frightened him immensely. Hear his account for yourself.
I want to wake up. You're not going to wake up. You're in deep sleep. You're comfortable. Relax. This is not going to trouble you. Go on. You can remember everything now. I try to maintain control so Betty cannot tell I am scared. God, I'm scared. It's all right. You can go right on, experience it. It will not hurt you now. I got to get my gun. Oh! I got my gun! All right. All right, that's all. Go to sleep, Steve. You got to get now. Oh, you'll forget it now. You've forgotten. Calm now. Relax. Deeply relaxed.
Barney kept his eyes closed throughout most of that night out of fear. So he had less details to offer than Betty did. But he did remember laying on a table and being in a pristine-looking pale blue room that looked like a hospital room. He remembered a cup of some kind being placed over his genitals, and he felt that they were extracting a sperm sample. He also would describe the beings as being dressed in navy uniforms, except for the leader, who wore a black, shiny coat with a cap on his head. The examiner then looked Barney over, head to toe, similar to Betty. He counted each and every one of his vertebrae. Then he quickly inserted and removed a thin tube from Barney's anus. Throughout this whole process, the beings communicated with Barney, but without words. He referred to it as thought transference, as I mentioned earlier. He also remembered after the encounter, he and Betty were elated. He remembered, which is so creepy, honestly, to me, he remembered them both smiling and thinking that wasn't so bad. He actually thought that it was funny. He had no reason to fear anymore. And he remembered Betty had the biggest smile on her face. Then the spacecraft, which was now a huge bright orange ball, had left. As for Betty's hypnosis accounts, they mirrored her vivid dreams that she had experienced in many ways. But there were some key differences. One of the most significant differences was the appearance of the aliens and the general sequence of events. Betty and Barney described these beings as being more in line with the now famous image of gray aliens. In her dreams, the creatures had been more human-like. Perhaps Betty's subconscious had filled in some missing details, confabulating, trying to make sense of that night. Dr. Benjamin Simon also asked Betty to draw out a star map because she remembered seeing one that night. She had dreamed about it as well. She draws out this star map with her eyes closed, stating that the stars that she drew were the ones that were the most important in the universe. She also recalled asking the leader about this star map and what it meant. He told her that the lines between the stars represented trading routes. And we're going to talk more about this star map later, but the star map is the part of the story where I got very perplexed. I was like having a total mind fuck. I was like, could this all have been real? This is crazy. Benjamin Simon then concluded Barney's account had been inspired by his wife's dream. But Barney rejected this. After his hypnosis sessions, he was now fully convinced he and his wife had been abducted by aliens that night, which is interesting because he had tried to be so logical this whole time and was like fighting it. No, there's an explanation. But the hypnosis brought him to this conclusion. And, you might see that as them being false memories. And like, that's why he feels this way. Or it could be that they pulled the memories out. It's very controversial. The Hills story would then soon spread all over, though they never sought publicity. And the stories that were published were also very inaccurate. But on October 25th, 1965, the Boston Traveler ran a front page story titled UFO Chiller. Did they seize couple? The reporter was a man named John H. Luttrell, and he had gotten an audio recording of a lecture that the pair had given to a small private audience at the Quincy Center in 1963. And then he got his hands on these notes from all these interviews with the Hills, like interviews with UFO investigators, which the Hills were told were completely confidential. So that's insane. And Luttrell also found out that the Hills had done numerous hypnosis sessions with Benjamin Simon. The next day, the United Press International picked up the story, and the rest was history. Betty and Barney Hill had become household names. The Hills were horrified. Their story had been written without their permission, and again, a lot of it was false information. They were basically doing a smear campaign, and this is like the last thing the Hills wanted. They didn't want to appear insane. They wanted to be able to go on with their lives. So it is at this point, I want to highlight again, this is when the Hills started talking to the media, was after their story was ripped out from under them. They were trying to defend themselves. It's not like they were seeking this attention. In 1966, author John G. Fuller convinced the Hills and Benjamin Simon to participate in his book called The Interrupted Journey, which is a retelling of the abduction and has a copy of Betty's star map drawing as well. This book was a major success. Betty continued to tell their story over the decades, becoming quite famous in the UFO community. And that book is in the show notes. That is the really dense book I was talking about, one of the books that I read for this. You might be wondering, thinking way back to the clothing, Betty and Barney's clothes have been tested numerous times over the years by experts, but the results have always been inconclusive. Barney Hill unfortunately passed away from a cerebral hemorrhage in 1969. Betty was heartbroken and never remarried, and she passed away from cancer in 2004. It seems like Barney never fully recovered from what happens to him. Some people argue that this alien encounter is what killed him. He died just several years after the incident. Skeptics often attribute the Hills' description of the gray aliens to have gone on to inspire other famous accounts like Travis Walton's, who we discussed in episode 105. Gray alien encounters are by far the most commonly reported. According to author and journalist C.D.B. Bryan, it is estimated 43% of abduction claims in the U.S. involved descriptions of grays, with other reports being of abductions by reptilian aliens and Nordic aliens. Grays are often described as being short, between 4 to 5 feet tall, hairless, with a bulbous, bald head, large, dark eyes, and of course, gray skin. So this is very similar to how the Hills described these creatures. This gray appearance has also been linked back to earlier reports from the Roswell incident. The responses to the Hills abduction are incredibly mixed. After all, this was the first truly well-reported case of its kind in the United States. This was a new concept. The Hills were the OG alien abductees. People really didn't know what to make of this. People had talked about seeing UFOs in the sky, but no one had ever talked about being abducted. So people either fully bought in or they painted the Hills as being attention-seeking, crazy, hoaxers, but the Hills never sought fame. Their story blew up because a reporter got a hold of their private information. In fact, Benjamin Simon, who had been doing all the hypnosis sessions, got a call from this reporter asking to be interviewed, and he refused. The Hills were also being continuously harassed by the media. Barney at one point declined to be interviewed, but the reporter told him that he had data on the case that he would publish with or without an interview. They were getting phone calls at their home from people all over the United States and even from different countries. I mean, Betty and Barney Hill couldn't catch a break. Newspapers were also blowing up Benjamin Simon's office left and right, and none of them wanted anything to do with it. The incident was causing the couple significant emotional strain. They were reluctant to discuss the case with anyone other than close friends. They feared being seen as eccentric, and they knew how controversial this was. They didn't want this experience to interfere with their dedicated work either in the civil rights movement, because they were very prominent advocates there. But the Hills abduction story was so influential, and it still remains arguably the most popular and well-known encounter of all time in the UFO community. To get back to some skepticism again, skeptics have pointed to the possibility of this being a shared delusion, which is something I do want to do an episode on at some point. People have tried to say that perhaps there was a lot of stress in Betty and Barney's marriage because they were an interracial couple in the 60s. The argument here is that this was so uncommon and frowned upon in some areas that the couple may have been under significant stress, which would increase their chances of having a shared delusion. But the couple has never once stated on records that they suffered from any problems in their relationship, and luckily, Betty and Barney were very supported by their family and friends. Betty refused the idea publicly in interviews, saying that everyone was always nothing but supportive of their relationship. Benjamin Simon, the hypnotist, has also refuted this theory, though he does not believe that they were actually abducted. A shared delusion or a simultaneous hallucination is sometimes called filet à deux, and this is a rare psychological phenomenon where two people develop a psychotic condition and that their beliefs and their delusions are similar to each other. But this is, again, pretty unlikely because, number one, they were saying they didn't have any stressors leading up to this. They had also never had any kind of shared delusion or weird experience like this before or after. So why would it just be like this random one-off event? Further skepticism can come from the hypnosis sessions. We have talked on this podcast before about how hypnosis has its controversies. And as someone who works in neuroscience, I agree, it is very controversial. I don't necessarily think that it is ethical. I don't really know if we can rely on the memories being true memories or if they're being implanted by therapists. We all have bias, so there's a lot of risk there. A skeptic blogger named Brian Dunning maintains because the hypnosis sessions occurred years after the event, the couple would have had plenty of time to concoct a story together, and that their recall also would have been unreliable. But this theory doesn't explain why Betty and Barney's stories had some significant differences. Additionally, some experts, like Harvard psychiatrist John E. Mack, have argued against the point that hypnosis is unethical and unreliable. So these are other experts in the field that have said there can be a lot of reliability from this technique. Mack has stated the vast majority of information regained by abductees who undergo hypnosis are giving these accounts after they have these like basic relaxation techniques they do, and that these types of methods apparently should not result in false memories. So I don't know exactly how that works, but he's basically saying there's a protocol, there's research. If you do it this way, it shouldn't cause false memories. Relaxation techniques can also be helpful in regaining repressed memories because people who have experienced trauma can subconsciously suppress it. I myself am going through EMDR therapy right now for trauma that I've never dealt with in my life. And a lot of it is calming and relaxation and grounding types of techniques to help me get through the memory and push through it and then be able to process it in a healthy way. Other people have argued the Hills did see something that night, but that it was a classic weather balloon. The Air Force further popularized this theory, stating publicly that the couple had seen a weather balloon that night. But this would not account for the strange light, the unnatural movement and speed of the object, and the part where they said they saw aliens and were abducted, obviously. As for the description of the aliens, skeptics have also said that the Hills were inspired by a science fiction television series called The Outer Limits, and this aired an episode called The Bellerose Shield. The episode aired in the middle of the Hills hypnosis sessions on February 10th, 1964. It did include aliens with very similar features to how the Hills described, but again, this was in the middle of their hypnotherapy sessions. And they had already described seeing creatures that night, and this was years before they did the hypnosis, you know? Betty also maintains she has never seen or heard of the show. Jim McDonald, a writer from New Hampshire, theorized the couple saw an aircraft warning beacon, which is timed to light up around the time that the couple claimed they first saw the UFO. But as for the rest of their account, they think it was nothing more than sleep deprivation and false memories obtained under hypnosis. So lots of different theories. All the sessions with Benjamin Simon were recorded, and these recordings have been examined endlessly by other experts. And there was little evidence in these recordings to prove that the Hills' memories had been implanted. Simon was a skeptic and a professional. He seemed very impartial throughout all of this. Barney did watch a show 2 weeks before the encounter that featured an alien, and the physical characteristics did closely match what the Hills claimed to have seen. So I do want to highlight that. That could have influenced his description. But something that I find really compelling, there were numerous other sightings, all well documented and published reports from other people living in the area around the same time that Betty and Barney had their encounter, including the very infamous Exeter incident in 1965. New Hampshire also ranks the 6th in the US for the most UFO sightings, so it seems like there is some weird shit going on over in New Hampshire. The other final thing that I find incredible is the star map. I told you we would come back to it. So remember the star map Betty drew that she said the aliens gave her. At the time, it wasn't recognized as any known star pattern when astronomers studied it. They thought, this is junk, she made this up. 8 years later, when telescopes became more powerful, astronomers studied Betty's star map again. And guess what? They found a match. Her star map was Zeta Reticuli, an area often reported in other alien abductions. Statisticians also studied the star map, and the chances of Betty being able to just so happen to draw all of those points by coincidence was damn near impossible. And I will put a picture of Zeta Reticuli and Betty's star map on the Instagram page and in the YouTube video. If you have never seen it before, you need to look at it because it is shocking. It is literally the same freaking thing. How do you explain that? There's also a lot of high-ranking professionals, including people who worked on Project Blue Book, that find the Hill story believable. So, the ultimate question: were the Hills abducted by aliens on September 19th, 1961? We'll likely never know, but nevertheless, their story is infamous, remarkable, terrifying, and truly perplexing. And that, everybody, is the story of Betty and Barney Hill. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to let me know. If you're watching on YouTube, like this video, hit subscribe, drop a comment down below with your thoughts. If you're listening on Spotify, you can leave a comment on this exact episode. I can reply. We can have a little chit chat. It'll be lots of fun. And I would love if you continue to follow along. Please, please, please leave a 5-star review wherever you listen. It really, really helps the show. Continue to tell people about the podcast. And if you want to support further, if you want early ad-free episodes, all the bonus content, go use the code SUMMER50 at checkout at patreon.com/Perplexity Mystery Podcast. There's so much great stuff happening over there. I just released an episode where I'm recapping the Martha Stewart documentary, and I did my Ozark Howler episode last week for Texas Urban Legends, where we talked about that cryptid. We do creepy stories from the internet. I take, requests too. So whatever you guys want. And then you always get those early and ad-free episodes as well. And it helps support the show because I love doing this, but it's also helpful to get some money through it so that I can continue to pay for equipment, get upgrades for things so I can bring you more content, better content. The more financially stable I am, the more time I have to be doing this for you guys. So I completely understand if you cannot do that, no pressure. I only want you to join if you want to. If you can't, I understand. It's rough out there. What I would ask is that you leave a 5-star review, please and thank you. That is a free, great way to support, and that boosts me up the algorithms. That is largely how I get new listeners. So thank you in advance for that. And yeah, check out the books in the show notes. If you want to learn more, read The Interrupted Journey by John G. Fuller, read Close Encounters by Duncan Murphy. There's a couple other little encounters in there that are really interesting. Close Encounters is a super, super short read, whereas Interrupted Journey is very dense, but very interesting. So that is my Betty and Barney Hill episode. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was so interesting to learn about. I found the hypnosis very, very interesting. And I can't get the star map out of my head. And if you guys know me, I've talked about on other shows too, and I think on here, just like aliens are something I've always had a hard time wrapping my head around. I believe in ghosts. I don't really know if I believe in aliens, but after I did this story, I just was like, holy shit, could I be wrong about everything? I don't know if you guys can hear that, but there are birds going absolutely insane right now over by my window. But anyway, yeah, so it was a lot of fun to learn about. And yeah, just I hope y'all enjoyed it. Let me know. You all are amazing. I hope you have a great week, and please stay safe. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.